everyone. Welcome to the Mindful Place Summit. Today I have Hunter Clarke-Fields. She's a mindfulness mentor, host of the Mindful Mama podcast, creator of mindful parenting courses and memberships, and author of Raising Good Humans. So she helps parents bring calm into their daily lives and cooperation within their families. Hunter has over 20 years of experience in the meditation and yoga practices and has taught mindfulness to thousands worldwide. She is a mother of 2 active daughters who challenge her every day to hone her craft. So welcome, Hunter.
So true. Thank you, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. So I'm really interested in the work that you do. Can you start by just telling us about your mindful journey and what mindfulness means to you?
Sure. I started studying mindfulness as a teenager, kind of like desperate for something. I'd always been this really highly sensitive kid. And I used to sort of like fall into these, I would be kind of on an emotional roller coaster, and I would fall into these pits of depression or feeling like I couldn't handle life, like on a pretty regular basis. And I started reading about mindfulness as a teenager. I started like kind of gobbling up books, and it did take me a decade before I actually sat down to practice meditation. And then lo and behold, it actually did a lot more work than at reading about it or listening about it, to actually sit and do the work of doing a sitting meditation practice. And but at first I didn't realize it was helping so much, so I'd always been going through those pits, and I finally had done a yoga teacher training. And so I was able to come home, and I sat for 10 minutes a day, and I'm like, okay, I'm sitting. And then after a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, I was like, oh, this is so frustrating. I'm just sitting here thinking the whole time, like, I'm not even doing this, like, what's the matter? But then I looked back over the rest of my life off the cushion. I realized that I hadn't actually fallen into any of those pits that I used to fall into every like week or 2 weeks, like for my whole life. I remember, panic attacks, and before high school as a high schooler, and then before I was as a high schooler as a teacher, and all these different things. And I just hadn't fallen into any of those pits. And it was this huge game changer for me as far as more equanimity. And so, so then when I was pregnant, I thought, like, I remember like sitting in my meditation group and thinking like, this is going to be awesome. Like, my child's going to be so calm and peaceful. Look at us. We're sitting here meditating together. And then I had sort of the wake up that we all get, I think, when, actual real life with a child hits us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And how did you find that when real life hits you? Like, were you reminded of where you could go and how you could find that peace and calm within, or just completely go with the flow and your practice kind of got pushed to the side? How did you move through that transition?
Well, there was a little bit of everything, I guess. My practice did get pushed to the side to some effect. And my child was really highly sensitive child, go figure, really kind of fussy kid. And I remember I had her at this birth center, and all my birth center moms group friends were all just like, they were just so like blissed out with their children. And I was like, this is really hard. Like, why is this so hard for me? And then when she started walking and talking and just like resisting everything that I was saying, my anger bubbled up, like my temper. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, who knew that was there? It was just, I could see, this was the same temper that my father has. And that was a big, big wake up call for me. After a couple days of like, crying in the stairwell, like, wow, this is terrible, I was finally, okay, I've got to do something. And I refocused on my mindfulness practice. And I really went to sort of calm that reactivity, really went into sort of an intensive period of study and learning. I remember at that time, I would listen to some peaceful parenting podcasts, and I would think, that's great, but how do you do that? How do you respond that way? How do you do that? What do you say? And so the work that I do brings together those things. So what I realized ultimately was that in the parenting world, there are these people are amazing, teaching amazing things. And you say, okay, like say these things, respond this way to your child and everything's going to be great. And I'd be like, that's great, but I don't remember any of that when I'm triggered and frustrated. Like it literally, as we now know about the brain, like it all goes out the window. When that stress response is triggered, it literally bypasses that upper part of the brain. So that was great, but I was, triggered. And then in the mindfulness world, they were, it was kind of like the message was a little like, well, let's just calm down, lower our reactivity, and then everything will be fine. You'll just be more thoughtful about what to say. And then I didn't actually find that to be true either. I would calm down, and then something that like my parents might have said to me would come out of my mouth, and my daughter would just like explode like a little time bomb again. So I really saw that like mindfulness without skillful, was not enough, right? Like it needs that skillful communication. But skillful communication, just learning that's not enough either, because you literally can't access it in the brain if you're not able to take care of that biological stress response. And so I really saw like that these two things kind of needed to come together, and that all of this inner work was so important. And we need to pair that with the outer work of how do we communicate? How do we talk to our kids so they're not so resistant to us? How do we kind of break out of that like authoritarian mold that we were often raised with? So there was a lot of learning that happened, and working on both of those things together.
Absolutely. When you're telling your story, I'm over here completely resonating with it. I do have 3 children of my own, and it's interesting to hear that most parents at the beginning stages of bringing in a new family member into their home, it's really overwhelming. And like you mentioned, just maybe it's just that one thing that today I'm just going to work on my breath, or today I'm just going to have, some calm music while I'm, feeding baby or whatever. But whatever that is, to come back to that common ground versus the chaos and the crazy and everything that's happening around us all the time. It's very interesting to know that if you just pick the one thing, one thing, right, to be able to move into flow with that. So I'm really curious about the mindful practices and what it does to the brain. If you can speak a little bit more on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, people get so frustrated. I mean, kids are frustrating. Kids are like, irritating, and they annoy us, and they break our stuff sometimes, and they yell in our ears, all of these unskillful things. And that's okay. Like that's normal. And we have this, biological stress response. You just have a nervous system that you were born with, and people get very frustrated that we yell. We feel so bad about ourselves because we yell. But it's interesting because it really is kind of like literally in many ways like not your fault. Like, so what's happening as that stress response happens is that your body is seeing your child as a threat. Your body is just, your nervous system is seeing your child as a threat for whatever reason. And so that in the brain, there's the earliest evolved parts of the brain in the brainstem, and there's that kind of alarm bell of the brain called the amygdala. They're 2 little almond-shaped clusters deep in there, and they're just like on or they're off. And so when they're on, that stress response is activated. We know what that feels like. Our muscles get tight, we get hot, our shoulders get tense. It's always in the shoulders. And what happens in the brain is that amygdala literally bypasses the upper part of the brain. So the later evolved part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, and it is the seat of all of your higher order thinking, empathy, verbal ability, problem solving skills, all that stuff like that we want to use. It's all up there, but it's slower. It evolved later. That kind of thinking takes some time. And when our nervous system feels threatened, it bypasses that so we can react quickly to that threat. And so that's not something you chose to do, right? Like no one chose to like wake up in the morning and like, I think I'm going to lose it at my kid at like, 4 o'clock. Like that's not what anyone decided to do.
Yeah.
This is a biological response, a nervous system that you inherited that we all have. We don't choose it, but we can learn to work with it and deal with it. And part of dealing with it is understanding that self-blame is not helpful. Like it doesn't help us deal with it. But that's why for me, mindfulness is such a big part of that, because mindfulness meditation has been shown by many different studies and brain scans. It's really interesting. The brain scans have shown that after an 8-week course of mindfulness meditation, often mindfulness-based stress reduction, that it literally shrinks the amygdala, that alarm bell in the brain, makes them less dense, and literally grows more dense, the prefrontal cortex, and makes the connection to the prefrontal cortex stronger. So you're literally making it less likely that you'll just be reactive, and it's kind of like you're building a muscle, of non-reactivity, and you're weakening that muscle of reactivity. So it's amazing all the different benefits. Like Johns Hopkins meta study showed 47 different studies show it increases well-being, increases quality of sleep, decreases anxiety, decreases depression, all of those things, increases mental focus.
Absolutely.
Those are all amazing, but for parents, it really helps us to decrease our reactivity and access those parts of the brain that we really want to parent from. Higher order thinking, connection, problem solving, empathy. So it really is, it's about our biology. It's about kind of understanding that and working with it.
It's so beautiful stated. And, whenever you're talking about the science behind it, my brain's going off, because it's so easy for us as parents or caregivers to judge ourselves, right? Where it's like, okay, that's bringing something up for me. And the key piece that I'm gathering from you too is that awareness, right? Instead of just saying, oh, I messed up that, that conversation with my oldest, or, oh my goodness, I'm not really resonating with that, but why did I react that way? Taking that step back to understand that these things are naturally occurring, but to have that awareness behind it, to take notice, right? And not beat ourselves down, but to start by saying, okay, wait a second. I'm taking notice to what's happening inside of me. And it's also true reflection when we can find that awareness in the children and teach them to recognize if they are going through the same process, why is our body reacting the way that we're reacting, and why are we saying these things, and to move together to come to that understanding of awareness. So I really resonate with that. And I look at, some history as far as, my past and burnout with it, being an educator, and connecting with these mindful practices to help me better understand and connect with myself, so then I could better support my own children and the children around me. So hearing you explain that is very beautiful, and it allows me to also say, okay, interesting, or that's interesting as well, because it's easy to be hard on ourselves, right?
Oh, it's so easy to be hard on ourselves. And I think what I wanted to add in here is that it's important to understand that, so as we realize that our alarm bells are bypassing that part of the brain, it's the same with our kids too. When they are feeling scared or nervous, if mom or dad or whoever is yelling and they feel scared, they literally can't then access that prefrontal cortex. They literally can't learn in that moment because they're dysregulated. So these pieces about understanding how to regulate our own system and doing the best we can with that is really important for us and for our kids. And as we learn it with ourselves, then we start to be able to just model that naturally for our kids, which is really nice.
Absolutely. So for, busy moms, caregivers, educators, dads, whoever's listening, how can they incorporate some of these practices into their busy world?
Well, I am there's a lot of great ways to practice to decrease your stress response. Honestly, one of the best ways to yell less is to just try to practice to have less overall stress in your life, because if you're just kind of stressed, it doesn't take that much to like push you over the edge, right? So getting plenty of sleep, it's a big ask, I know. Getting plenty of sleep and exercise and time with friends and things like that. Those are all really important. And and I know when I say this, it's a little frustrating because many of us live in societies and cultures where we don't get very much support, and who knows what's happening today. But you taking care of yourself and taking care of your body, your mind, your heart, that's not like a extra special thing. It's not selfish. It's actually your responsibility, because that's what keeps you grounded and able to respond, right? So all of those things are like the baseline. And that's a lot to ask, I know. So maybe you, dear watcher, are going to work on, maybe you're like, oh, sleep. So maybe that's what you'll work on. But let's say you've got some good sleep, you're getting good, all those things are pretty good. I really think it's a good idea to incorporate a formal mindfulness practice into your life that's teeny tiny, because it's a habit that changes everything else in your life. It changes the way as you start to have more clarity in your mind and your thinking, we experience everything through our minds. So it just gives us more clarity in every single part of our life. So I encourage people to, find a time right before you go to bed. Maybe you sit on the top of the toilet seat before you go in the shower, and you can play a 3-minute guided meditation and just sit and practice doing nothing, sitting with yourself, sitting with the weird discomfort of sitting by yourself and not doing anything else but that for just 3 minutes. It was really kind of a life. Yes, I'm in the bathroom, right? Totally. You could totally do it there. And just make a habit of, like, maybe every day when you wake up or wherever, or maybe it's while you're nursing your baby, you just set a timer for 5 minutes of that nursing time. But it really is, it's like to be able to carve out your own little time to make this habit makes all the other things that people recommend possible, and things that you remember, because people say to like practice to mindfully wash the dishes, or practice to, mindfully walk to the preschool as you pick up your child, right? And what I've found is that most people forget to do those other kind of extra added in things if they don't have some kind of daily formal, at this time, I sit here and I play this meditation, and I'm going to try it for 2 weeks. When I do it for 2 weeks, I'm going to give myself a bouquet of flowers. I'm going to celebrate it and get that support. But I think it really is doable. I've helped people with babies and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and to be able to find time in your lives to do this. If you have time to do social media, you have 5 minutes to do this. Like, you can make that time, and it'll help you to be. One of the biggest reasons to do this, I think, is to just think about, like, our children, right? Like, we want to be less reactive. Like, that's a huge motivator. But there's this quote that for me really sums it up. Like, when we're always, most of the time, like, we're always like in the future, we're planning, we're thinking about this, we may be with our children, but our minds are a million miles away. That happens a lot. And as you practice, you can practice then to bring it into those moments and become more present in your daily life. And my teacher, the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, he said, when you love someone, the best thing you can offer them is your presence. How can you love if you are not there? And it's like, oh yes, right? Like, how can you love if you are not there? That, for me, that's a huge motivator.
Absolutely. Well, and you just talking about that again, right? As we move through this new world, our children, people, like, connection, and I keep going back to this, is the key, right? The connection with self, connection with our children, and just having those, if it's, you're walking mindfully to pick up from, when you get there, like, having that, how is your day, like, those pieces of connection when you're connecting with yourself, connecting with your children, connecting with nature, having those mindful moments that you can stack upon other tasks. So it's not like a big thing that you're doing, but you're right. Making the choice that you're going to carve out this time, if it's wherever you are, whoever you're with, and it doesn't have to be this super big task, just keeping it simple. Right. And what I'm hearing from you is that the more simple we can make it, the easier it is for us to take part in it and do the practices, but also the children around us can even take part in these simple tasks. So my question for you, because I know you do your Big Mindful Mama podcast, how can our listeners find you? I'm going to post some links below, but where would be the best avenue for them to find you?
Sure. I'm at I'm at mindfulmamamentor.com, and I have the book Raising Good Humans. It's everywhere you want to buy a book, and you can go to raisinggoodhumansbook.com. But yeah, the podcast and all that stuff is there, and I put up behind the scenes on Instagram if they're curious.
Yay. So we will post the links below, and I know you've got a little gift for our listeners today. If you could touch on that as well.
Sure. Yeah. I have a free mini course called 5 Simple Things You Can Do Today to Be Less Irritable at Your Child, which I think is what we all want. But it kind of walks us through some simple things. They're simple, but they may not be easy, but they are simple grounding pieces to help you be less irritable.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate our chat today. And, whenever I'm having conversations, it allows me to also reflect on myself and not be so hard on the parenting. And, if we do have triggers and certain things that we're in that state of mind where it overflows, that we can take that step back and just be kind to ourselves and understand that it's all happening. It's showing up for a reason, and just to take notice of that. And, when a mentor said to me, Crystal, you are too busy and you seem to be overwhelmed, it was kind of a slap in the face to say, oh, you mean if I can remove a lot of this stimuli and I can sit with myself and just be present, take some breaths, the shift happened. And it didn't have to be this big ordeal or to incorporate XYZ. It was just reconnecting and keeping it simple. I would put little sticky notes around the house that would say breathe, right? So if I'm doing, and I would just notice it, and just coming back to that simple place of breath and that awareness piece, my whole world really shifted, and my children shifted, and I recognized that they're a mirror of myself. So when my youngest was born, she did a woo firecracker, right? And all sputtering out. And over the last 3 years, the more I incorporate my own practices, the more it's mirroring into my children's lives. So I just want to say thank you, and I share what resonates with me, because I'm sure it resonates with some of our listeners as well. And the message that I'm receiving is be kind to ourselves. And I really appreciate you coming on today. Is there any last words that you want to leave our listeners with here today?
Yeah, I think I would just echo what you're saying. Be kind to yourself, that self-compassion, like what you're doing right now, like learning and understanding. That's great. Keep leaning into what's working and what you've done well, and reminding yourself of those things. Lean into the good, and it will only grow stronger. So yeah, thank you so much, Crystal. I really appreciate it.